cause great alarm for many people, and this scaremongering is hugely damaging when mass inoculation is the route out of the current crisis and will enable us to return to normal life. So what steps is my honourable friend's department taking to work with other government departments to ensure accurate information on the safety of vaccines is conveyed to communities for whom English is not their first language?
Minister.
On languages specifically, Mr. Speaker, the Vaccine Confidence Campaign is a cross-government one, and it includes work to translate key messages and guidance in over 10 different ethnic languages across radio stations and publications. But I do want to reiterate the point he is making. The vaccine disinformation is harmful and dangerous, and it is everyone's responsibility to access information from authoritative sources and not share misleading information. Government is also working to help social media platforms identify and take action against incorrect claims about the virus and vaccinations.
Let's head up to Scotland to SNP spokesperson Anne McLaughlin. Anne McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thankfully, we expect uptake of the vaccine amongst older people to be high, but uptake in that group of people is low when it comes to pension credit. The NHS will have face-to-face contact with almost every older person on these islands this year. I see an ideal opportunity to work with the DWP to get the message across that billions of pounds of pension credit is going unclaimed by older people. And I wonder if the Minister will agree to meet with me to look at how we can do something about this.
Minister.
The question is not specifically related to vaccines, so I think I will defer to DWP ministers to respond to her and meet with her on the issue specifically.
Right, let's head to the Chair of the Select Committee. Caroline Noakes in Romsey. Caroline Noakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's crucially important that the Vaccine Confidence Campaign is accessible to those with learning difficulties, those with hearing impairment, those with visual impairment, and indeed those without English as their first language. Please can my honourable friend outline what government is doing across all departments to make sure that it's as accessible as possible for those who are among the least advantaged in our society?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend will know that the JCVI, the Joint Committee on Vaccinations, is giving advice on how to prioritise those who are most in need. The Vaccine Confidence Campaign is specifically to do with vaccine hesitancy, and I don't believe that this is one of the issues that we have found amongst the groups that she has mentioned. What we want to make sure is that they are prioritised according to their need and vulnerability, but I take the point that she has made, and I'm assured that that is the work that is taking place across government.
We have a substantive question to Minister Ford, who's virtual. Minister Ford. Going to take the question. Can we have a minister to answer the question, please? Or give the substantive.
So sorry.
Okay,
I'm so sorry. There was a struggle there with the unmute button. Spreading opportunity is a top priority across government, and that's why we're levelling up school standards, investing over 7.1 billion more in schools by 2022-23 than we did in 2019-20. We're committed to providing extra support for the education of disadvantaged children through the pandemic, including through our £350 million national tutoring programme, continuing to provide eligible children with free school lunches during term time, and by securing over 1 million laptops and tablets, of which over 500,000 have already been delivered.
We now to head to Peter Aldous in Waveney. Peter Aldous.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to the Minister for her reply. Coastal communities such as Lowestoft face particular challenges in improving social mobility. I'll be most grateful if my honourable friend can outline the coordinating action that is being taken to ensure that all government departments work together to ensure that children in seaside towns have every opportunity to realise their full potential.
Now go back to Minister Ford. Minister Ford.
Mr. Speaker, clearly what we need to do with coastal communities, as we are doing, we're working with Minister Ford in education to make sure that childcare is available for every child, which is why we're keeping early years in particular open, why BAYS is working to make sure that we protect jobs and create new job opportunities for those in coastal communities.
We know a substantive question to Minister Scully.
Yeah, the government has taken significant steps to support employment opportunities for women, and that includes starting with protecting jobs. The coronavirus job retention scheme has supported 4.5 million jobs done by women. The self-employed income support scheme has issued grants to 1.4 million women, and we're providing an extra £4.6 billion to support sectors required to close during the lockdown, which we know predominantly employ women.
Let's head to Newbury with Laura Farris. Laura Farris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Female employment is highest in the services sector and has been hit particularly hard by redundancies in hospitality, retail and leisure. The new deal announced by the Prime Minister in June focused on house building, road building, infrastructure, all vital sectors, but heavily geared towards male employment. Can my honourable friend confirm whether there are equivalent plans to stimulate female employment in the months ahead? And would he meet with me to discuss this?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for that question and what she is doing to encourage such employment. We're committed to having a fair recovery for all. During the crisis, we rolled out unprecedented levels of support to protect jobs for both women and men. And of course, yes, I'll be happy to meet my honourable friend to discuss what more we can do to stimulate employment, including female employment, in the months ahead.
We now come to Shadow Minister Charlotte Nichols.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Research by the Trades Union Congress shows that around 90% of mothers have taken on more childcare responsibilities since the pandemic began, with 43% having to balance childcare with working from home. This is a particular pressure for single-parent households, the majority of which research shows are headed by women. With women at greater risk of redundancy and disproportionately employed in sectors hardest hit by shutdowns, will the Minister commit to creating a legal, enforceable and immediate right for parents to request paid flexible furlough?
Minister.
Certainly furlough is available for women that and indeed men who have childcare responsibilities. It is at the moment a responsibility of the employer to whether to give that. But if women do feel unduly disadvantaged of that, they can approach ACAS.
James Simpson.
Question 12, please, Mr. Speaker.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I will answer questions 12 and 13 together. I want to make sure the equality agenda moves beyond just protected characteristics. Instead, we will make sure that we're focused on every individual in Britain having a fair chance in life and fair access to public services.
James Sunderland.
Mr. Speaker, I really welcome the government's agenda on women and equalities, and I commend my right honourable friend for her outstanding leadership. But could I please also ask her to reassure me that we will never bow to those who suggest that white people should feel guilty for being white, or those who peddle the notion of white privilege. We're in this together, so will she please undertake today to write to other government departments to reinforce this?
Secretary Truss.
Britain is one of the best places in the world to live, no matter your skin colour, sexuality, religion or anything else. And we need to be positively empowering people in Britain to succeed so everyone has access to opportunity, not using positive discrimination. And that is the approach we are taking right across the government.
Let's head to Bob Blackman in Harrow East. Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and a very happy Lowry for the Dogra community who are celebrating today. I agree completely with my right honourable friend on the need to ensure that we move beyond the Equality Act 2010, but first we need to reform it. Will she bring forward proposals to remove caste as a protected characteristic from the Equality Act 2010 so that we can ensure that the Hindu, Sikh, Jain and Muslim communities are not disadvantaged in our society?
Secretary Truss.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question. Caste is not a protected characteristic in the Equality Act 2010, and case law has already shown that a claim of caste discrimination could qualify for protection under the race provisions in the Act.
We now have a substantive question to Secretary Truss. Secretary Truss.
We can and must have an equality agenda that is driven by evidence, and that's where we've launched an equality data project, which will look at the life paths of individuals across this country and deliver hard data about the barriers people face.
Let's head to Gedling with Tom Randall. Tom Randall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over the Christmas break, I was disappointed to read in The Guardian comments by Halima Begum, the director of the Runnymede Trust, who ridiculously claimed, "I think the government's long-term plan is to work up white nationalism for the next elections." Would my right honourable friend agree with me that not only should this insulting thinking have no place in the setting of government policy, should have no place in mainstream discourse?
Secretary of Trust.
Well, I agree with my honourable friend. These comments are appalling, and they reflect an attitude on the left of politics that says if you're not from an oppressed group, then you're not entitled to an opinion. And I think that is fundamentally wrong. I believe that equality is for everyone, and I'm not going to let this debate be dominated by a few campaign groups.
We now have to move to topicals. We start with Tom Hunt.
Topical question 1.
Secretary of Trust.
Mr. Speaker, as we recover from COVID, we need to make sure everyone in Britain has a chance to succeed and is being treated fairly in the workplace. We're broadening the focus of the Equality Hub from protected characteristics to equality for all, and in particular tackling the scourge of geographical inequality. I will shortly be saying more about our new fight for fairness, delivering a better deal for everyone and standing up for fundamental human rights and freedoms across the world.
Speaker, I very much welcome the fact that the equality agenda will be looking beyond simply protected characteristics. One key problem has been white pupils who are eligible for free school meals and how academically they have underperformed compared with other low-income groups. Does the Minister feel as though the fact that the equality agenda we've been working with, which has been almost exclusively focused on protected characteristics, may be an explainer in why this is the case?
Well, my honourable friend makes a good point. The attainment score for GCSE for white British children who receive free school meals is lower than the equivalent for black and Asian children. And at the Equality Hub, we're conducting a life path analysis to understand where the real issues are, and we're working closely with the Department of Education to take action on this issue.
We now go over to the Shadow Secretary of State, Marcia de Cordova. Marcia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The impacts of 10 years of austerity are stark. 14 million people are now in poverty. And figures out today show that 45% of disabled people in work at the start of last year have reported no earnings by summer. And the figures from the Department for Work and Pensions show that there are more women likely to live in poverty. In 2010, the Tory-led government scrapped the Equality Act socio-economic duty. Addressing class and other inequalities is not an either-or. So the Minister's newfound passion to address class and poverty, will she now enact the socio-economic duty?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have made significant progress since 2010 in addressing disparities, for example, closing the attainment gap in education. But we recognise that during the COVID crisis, more needs to be done to address inequality and help level up our country. But the way we're going to do that is to focus on equality for everyone across our country, making sure everyone has a fair chance, including addressing the issue of geographical inequality, which is severe in this nation.
Our second question from the Shadow Secretary of State. What the hell have they done again?
Okay, let's see Maria Miller.
Right, we'll come back to that. Maria Miller.
Mr. Speaker, the evidence shows that women face significantly greater risk of violence and harassment than men in many aspects of their lives. And to show their continued commitment to this issue, when will the government be ratifying the International Labour Organisation's new global convention outlawing violence and harassment at work? And will my right honourable friend join me in supporting UN Women's Safer Spaces Now campaign for better safety online and in public spaces too?
I thank my right honourable friend for that question. We are finalising consultations across government on ratification of the ILO Violence and Harassment Convention. Once complete, we will inform Parliament of our intentions regarding ratification. And I would also like to let her know that the government shares the Safe Spaces campaign's goals to see street harassment stamped out and is committed to tackling all forms of abuse against women and girls.
We now go back to the Shadow Secretary of State for the second question. How should I call it?
Thank you again, Mr. Speaker. So in the Minister's speech last month, she stated that she wanted to focus on facts, and she's made reference to that today. So focusing on facts, not fashion, and to concentrate on data and research. Yet the overwhelming body of evidence of structural racism is clear. It is a fact that Black Caribbean children are more likely to be excluded from school. It is a fact that Black women are 5 times more likely to die in childbirth. I say to the Minister, this is not fashion, they are facts. And doesn't this evidence point towards the need for action rather than the continual denial and dismissal of the realities of systemic racism?
My honourable friend, the Minister for Equalities, has already presented the clear evidence there is on the COVID crisis. My point is that rather than looking at equality through the prism of groups, we should be focusing on making sure that every individual in this country, regardless of their race, their background, their sexuality or their sex, has the opportunity to succeed. And that is what the data project that we are working on will look at.
Heading to Shadow Minister Vicky Foxcroft. Vicky Foxcroft.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've been contacted by a WASPy woman who is a carer for her severely disabled ex-partner. She stopped work in 2019 due to his escalating care needs and was awarded carer's allowance. When she finally received her state pension, after decades of paying into the system, she was shocked to find she was no longer eligible for carer's allowance. How can it be right that when they hit pension age, carers, 72% of whom are women, are no longer eligible for support?
Apologies, Mr. Speaker. I will take up her point with the Department for Work and Pensions.
We now are coming to questions to the Prime Minister. Hi, Prime Minister. I will first call the Prime Minister to answer the engagements question 1, and then I will call Sigurður Streeter to ask his supplementary. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure members of the House will want to join me in offering our condolences to the family and friends of our former colleague Brian Binley, who died over Christmas and who was an irrepressible member, Mr. Speaker, of this House. Mr. Speaker, today we are publishing our proposals for reforming the Mental Health Act. For too long we've seen rising rates of detention that not only had little beneficial effect, but left some worse off, not better off. That's why we're making sure the Act works better for some of the most vulnerable in our society and gives them more of a legal right in deciding what treatment works best for them. And my right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, will update the House shortly. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, and in addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
We now head to South West Devon with Sigurður Streeter. Sigurður.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I know the whole House will want to associate itself with the Prime Minister's remarks about our dear Brian Binley. Mr. Speaker, one of the groups hit hardest by the pandemic is young people in full-time education, especially those facing exams last year and this, with all of the mental health challenges that come from such uncertainty. Does my right honourable friend agree that those for whom exams have been scrapped this year would now benefit from the utmost clarity about how exactly they will be assessed? A clear plan announced early without last-minute changes to help teachers and students prepare for an even more challenging experience. Thank you.
Well, my right honourable friend is absolutely right, and there is clearly a problem of differential learning that has grown over the last few months and risks being exacerbated now by the current lockdown, and we'll do everything we can to ensure that exams are fair, that the ways of testing are set out in a timely way, and the Department for Education is launching a consultation with Ofqual to ensure that we get the right arrangements for this year.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition. Right Honourable Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join the condolences expressed by the Prime Minister, I'm sure, on behalf of the whole of the House? Can I also, Mr. Speaker, begin by paying tribute to all of those involved in the vaccine programme? I went to the Newham vaccine hub last week, and it was really uplifting to see the NHS, the Red Cross, and lots of volunteers all working together and giving real hope. They had a simple message to me, which is if they had more vaccine, they could and they would do more. And I'm sure that's shared across the country. I welcome news that's come out this morning about a pilot of 24/7 vaccine centres. I anticipate there's going to be huge clamour for this. So can the Prime Minister tell us, when will the 24/7 vaccine centres be open to the public, because I understand they're not at the moment, and when will they be rolled out across the country?
Well, I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman for what he says about the rollout of vaccines, and I can tell him that we'll be going to 24/7 as soon as we can, and my right friend, the Health Secretary, will be setting out more about that in due course. And as he rightly says, at the moment the limit is on supply. We have a huge network, 233 hospitals, 1,000 GP surgeries, 200 pharmacies and 50 mass vaccination centres. And they are going, as he has seen himself, exceptionally fast. I pay tribute to their work. And it's thanks to the work of the NHS and to the Vaccine Task Force that we have secured more doses, I think, per capita than virtually any other country in the world, certainly more than any other country in Europe.
Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I obviously welcome that and urge the Prime Minister and the Government to get on with this. We're all happy to help, and there are many volunteers who are. The sooner we have 24/7 vaccine centres, the better for our NHS and the better for our economy. Mr. Speaker, the last PMQs was on the 16th of December. The Prime Minister told us then that we were seeing, in his words, a significant reduction in the virus. He told us then that there was no need for endless lockdowns and no need to change the rules about Christmas mixing. Since then, since that last PMQs, 17,000 people have died of COVID. 60,000 people have been admitted to hospital. And there's been over 1 million new cases. How did the Prime Minister get it so wrong? And why was he so slow to act?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course, what he fails to point out is that on the 18th of December, 2 days later, the government was informed of the spread of the new variant and the fact that it spreads roughly 50 to 70% faster than the old variant, and that is why it is indeed correct to say that the situation today is very troubling indeed. We have 32,000 COVID patients in hospital. The NHS is under huge strain. And Mr. Speaker, I would like to take this opportunity to pay tribute to all the staff, the doctors, the nurses, everybody working now in our NHS who are doing an extraordinary job under the most challenging possible circumstances to help those who so desperately need it. And I thank them for what they are doing. But at the same time, I also want to thank all those involved in what is the biggest vaccination programme in the history of this country, where once again the NHS is in the lead, working with the Army and the Legion of volunteers and everybody else. And that programme of vaccines, Mr. Speaker, does show the way forward. It does show how we're going to come through this pandemic. And again, I repeat my gratitude to all those involved, because they've now vaccinated 2.4 million people, delivered 2.8 million doses, more than any other country in Europe. This is the toughest of times, Mr. Speaker, but we can see the way forward.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister says that effectively 2 days after that PMQs, the advice changed. The truth is, the indicators were all in the wrong direction back at the last PMQs. But be that as it may, the Prime Minister says he got that advice on the 18th of December, 2 days after PMQs. And we've all seen the Sage minutes of the 22nd of December confirming the advice that was given to the government. the government's advisers warned the Prime Minister that the new variant was spreading fast and it was highly unlikely that November-style lockdowns would be sufficient to control it. Pretty clear advice. On the 18th of December to the Prime Minister from Sage, tougher lockdown than November is going to be needed. I've got the minutes here, everybody's seen them. Yet instead of acting on the 18th of December, the Prime Minister sat on his hands for over 2 weeks. We're now seeing in the daily figures the tragic consequences of that delay. So how does the Prime Minister justify delaying for 17 days after he got that advice on the 18th of December?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I must disagree very profoundly with what the right honourable gentleman just said, because he knows very well that within 24 hours of getting the advice on the 18th about the spread of the new variant, we acted to put the vast part of the country into much, much tougher measures. And indeed, they have, what we are now seeing, and it's very, very important to stress that these are early days, we are now seeing the beginnings of some signs that is starting to have an effect in many parts of the country, but by no means everywhere. And it is early days, Mr. Speaker, and people must keep their discipline, keep enforcing the rules, and work together, as I've said, to roll out that vaccine programme. But, Mr. Speaker, I do recall that on the day that we went into a national lockdown, and sadly we were obliged to shut the schools, even on that day, the Labour Party was advocating keeping schools open for understandable reasons, Mr. Speaker, because we all want to keep schools open, but I think it a bit much to be attacked for taking tougher measures to put this country into the protective measures it needed when the Labour Party were themselves calling then to keep schools open.
Mr. Speaker, just for the record, I wrote to the Prime Minister on the 22nd of December. I hadn't seen the Sage advice at that stage, saying to him, if it indicated there should be a national lockdown, he should do it immediately and he'd have our full support. I'll put that in the public domain so people can just check the record. But, Mr. Speaker, more fundamentally, the Prime Minister says we took measures straight away, we put people into different tiers. The advice was a November-style lockdown is not enough. How on earth was putting people into a different tiered system an answer to the advice that was given? And isn't this the situation that every time there's a big decision to take, the Prime Minister gets there late? The next big decision is obvious. The current restrictions are not strong enough to control the virus. Stronger restrictions are needed. And it's no point members opposite shaking their heads. In a week or two, the Prime Minister is likely to be asking members to vote for this. So can the Prime Minister tell us, when infection rates are much higher than last March, when hospital admissions are much higher than last March, when death rates are much higher than last March, why on earth are restrictions weaker than last March?
Mr. Speaker, we keep things under constant review, and we will continue to do so. And certainly if there is any need to toughen up restrictions, which I don't rule out, Mr. Speaker, we will of course come to this House. But perhaps, as is so often the case, the right honourable gentleman didn't listen to my earlier answer, because I pointed out to the House that actually the lockdown measures that we have in place, combined with the Tier 4 measures that we were using, are starting to show signs of some effect, and we must take account of that too, Mr. Speaker, because nobody can doubt the serious damage that is done by lockdowns to people's mental health, to jobs, to livelihoods as well. And Mr. Speaker, if to listen to the right honourable gentleman over the last 12 months, you'd think he had absolutely no other policy except to plunge this country into 12 months of lockdown. And as for coming too late to things, Mr. Speaker, I think it was only a few weeks ago that he was attacking the vaccine task force that has secured the very doses, the millions of doses that have put this country into the comparatively favourable position that we now find ourselves.
It's just not true. Every time I've spoken about the vaccine, I've supported it. But the Prime Minister says we're balancing health restrictions and the economy. And yet we ended 2020 with the highest death toll in Europe and the deepest recession in any major economy. So that just isn't a good enough answer. Mr. Speaker, I want to turn to the latest free school meals scandal. We've all seen images on social media of disgraceful food parcels for children, costed at about £5 each. That's not what the government promised. It's nowhere near enough. So can I ask the Prime Minister, would he be happy with his kids living on that? And if not, why is he happy for other people's kids to do so?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't think anybody in this House is happy with the disgraceful images that we've seen of the food parcels that have been offered. They are appalling. They're an insult to the families that have received them. And I'm grateful, by the way, to Marcus Rashford, who highlighted the issue and is doing quite an effective job by comparison with the right honourable gentleman in holding the government to account for these issues. And the company in question has rightly apologised and agreed to reimburse. But it is because we want to see our kids properly fed throughout this very difficult pandemic that we've massively increased the value of what we're providing. Another £170 million in the COVID winter grant scheme, £220 million more for the holiday activities and food programme, and we're now rolling out the national free school meal voucher scheme, as we did in March, to give parents the choice to give kids the food that they need. Under this government, we will do everything we can to ensure that no child goes hungry as a result of the privations caused by this pandemic.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister says that the parcels are disgraceful, but it shouldn't have taken social media to shame the Prime Minister into action. Like the Education Secretary, he blames others, and he invites me to hold him to account. So let me do that. Because blaming others, Prime Minister, it's not as simple as that, is it? Because I've checked the government guidance on free school meals, the current guidance, published by the Department of Education. I've got it here. It sets out example parcel for one child for 5 days. Department of Education, Prime Minister, you want to be held to account. 1 loaf of bread, 2 baked potatoes, block of cheese, baked beans, 3 individual yoghurts. Sound familiar? That's the images, Prime Minister, you just called disgraceful. The only difference I can see in this list and what the Prime Minister has described as disgraceful is a tin of sweet corn, a packet of ham and a bottle of milk. So he blames others. But this is on his watch. The truth is, families come last under this government, whether it's exams, free school meals or childcare. Will the Prime Minister undertake, he wants to be held to account, to take down this guidance by the close of play today and ensure that all of our children can get a decent meal during the pandemic?
Speaker, the right honourable gentleman's words would be less hypocritical and absurd if it were not for the fact that the
I don't believe anybody's a hypocrite in this chamber. I think we need to be a little bit careful about what we're saying to each other. There was a not truth earlier, and there was also comparisons to others. Please, let's keep the discipline in this chamber and the respect for each other. We're tidying up how this Parliament behaves, and I certainly expect the leadership of both parties to ensure that takes place. Prime Minister, would you like to withdraw hypocrisy?
I'm delighted to be advised by you, Mr. Speaker. Let me confine my criticism to the absurdity of the, which I hope is acceptable, Mr. Speaker, of the right honourable gentleman attacking us over free school meals when it was a Conservative government that instituted free school meals, universal free, not a Labour government, and of the 280 billion that we have spent securing the jobs and the livelihoods of people across this country, uprating universal credit, increasing and in addition increasing the living wage by record amounts this year and last year, increasing local housing allowance. The overwhelming majority, the bulk of the measures, the benefits fall in favour of the poorest and the neediest in society, which is what this House would expect. And Mr. Speaker, he takes one position one week, one position the next. That is what he does. That's been his whole lamentable approach throughout this, if I can get away with lamentable, Mr. Speaker, throughout this pandemic. And he says he supports the vaccine now. He says says he supports the vaccine rollout, and he goes and tries to associate himself with it because he senses that it is going well. But don't be in no doubt, Mr. Speaker, that was the party that wanted us, this country, to stay in the European Union vaccine programme. He stood on, yeah, absolutely true, he stood on a manifesto, which he has not repudiated, Mr. Speaker, to dismantle the very pharmaceutical companies that have created this miracle of science, which is true.
Prime Minister, there are questions, and sometimes we've got to try and answer the question to what was asked of you. I think to run through the history is one thing, but in fairness, it is Prime Minister's questions. What I would say is it was the final question, with lots of others to go through. So I think what I'm going to do now is move on to Simon Jupp in Sidmouth, who's desperate to ask a question of you, Prime Minister. Simon Jupp.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The hospitality industry is the lifeblood of East Devon. Our pubs, restaurants, cafes and hotels provide thousands of jobs, places to meet and places to stay. The generous support package now put in place will tide many of these businesses over for now, but they will need further support. Will my right honourable friend consider extending the VAT cut for hospitality to give them a helping hand when they're back open for business?
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and I know that my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, has done everything he can to help businesses throughout this pandemic, and that's why he's extended the grants, and that's why we've got the cuts for both for VAT and for business rates, and we will do everything we can to help as we go forward. But the best thing would, of course, be to ensure that we roll out this vaccine programme and bounce back as fast as possible. Any further announcements my right honourable friend makes will be well ahead of the 31st of March, by which we intend to have a budget.
Let's head up to Scotland to the leader of the SNP with Ian Blackford. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent in Lochaber, a producer and exporter of shellfish, is experiencing his worst nightmare. After loading a lorry of fresh local seafood on Monday, as he's done for 35 years, his driver faced bureaucracy and delays. Brexit red tape now means that £40,000 of his fresh, high-quality produce is lost, unable to be sold. Mr. Speaker, that 40,000 produce is income for over 100 local families in many remote and fragile communities. Can the Prime Minister tell my constituent, where is the sea of opportunity that he and his Scottish Tories promised?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we're putting £100 million into supporting the fishing industry in Scotland and across the whole of the UK. And it is the policy of the Scottish Nationalist Party, not just to break up the United Kingdom under their harebrained scheme, but also to take Scotland back into the EU and hand back control of Scottish fisheries to Brussels, thereby throwing away all those opportunities in a way that I think the right honourable gentleman himself opposite would say was totally absurd. And I'm amazed that he continues on this track.
Turning to Ian Blackford. Ian Blackford.
I'm amazed that the Prime Minister continues to traduce the name of the Scottish National Party. He's been told before and he really should get it right. And frankly, that answer was an insult to all fishermen that are facing loss today. The reality is, Mr. Speaker, that a third of the Scottish fishing fleet is tied up in harbour. Some boats are landing in Denmark rather than Scotland to avoid Brexit bureaucracy. Scottish seafood exporters are losing upwards of £1 million in sales a day. Seafood Scotland says all the extra red tape is an almost impossible task. It's even forced ferry operators to pause load deliveries to the continent. Mr. Speaker, the European Union have put in place a £5 billion fund to support businesses with the cost of Brexit. Last night, it was revealed that Ireland is receiving £1 billion of it. Can the Prime Minister tell Scottish business when they will be getting the same level of support, and where's the compensation for my constituent that's losing £40,000 today?
Mr. Speaker, he continually advocates the breakup of the union with the United Kingdom, and he continually advocates going back into the European Union, even though that would be immensely destructive to the Scottish, immensely destructive to the Scottish economy, to jobs, to livelihoods, to pensions, to the currency. And as far as I understand it, they're already spending money in Scotland on IndyRef 2, what they call IndyRef 2, when they should be getting on, Scottish nationals should be getting on with fighting the pandemic. That, I think, is what the people of Scotland want to see. And he might pay tribute, by the way, to the merits of the United Kingdom in rolling out a vaccine across the whole of the country. And I'm told, by the way, Mr. Speaker, that they can't even bring themselves to say the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. Perhaps he could just say that he likes the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine.
Well, let us move to Yorkshire instead with Julian Sturdy. Julian Sturdy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the vaccination programme making very encouraging progress, can the Prime Minister reaffirm that lifting restrictions to return to normal as soon as it is safe is an overriding national priority? And can I invite him to consider drawing a line in the sand in terms of vaccination of sufficient numbers of the priority group, the reaching of which will trigger a phased relaxation of controls as immunity widens?
Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I can confirm that we're going to go down the top 4 priority groups who account for 88%, sadly, of COVID deaths. The target is, as he knows, by the 15th of February, there will then be an opportunity to look very carefully at the measures that we have in place, and we'll try to reverse the restrictions as soon as we reasonably can in a way that doesn't involve overwhelming the NHS.
Let's head to Northern Ireland with Sir Geoffrey Donaldson. Sir Geoffrey.
The Prime Minister promised us that Northern Ireland will continue to have unfettered access to the UK internal market. And yet in my constituency, consumers are facing empty supermarket shelves. They can't get parcels delivered from Great Britain. Small businesses can't bring spare parts and raw materials into Northern Ireland from Great Britain. Steel importers are facing tariffs, and we have many other problems, all caused by the Northern Ireland Protocol. So what I and the people of Northern Ireland need to know from the Prime Minister, as leader of the United Kingdom, is what his government is going to do to address this. If he will consider invoking Article 16 of the Northern Ireland Protocol to resolve these issues, because the Trader Support Service is welcome, but it isn't the solution alone. We need direct government intervention to deal with this now.
Well, I thank the right honourable gentleman. I can tell him that at the moment goods are flowing effectively and in normal volumes between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So far, no lorries have been turned back. Yes, of course, there are teething problems, and what I can say, what I can confirm to him, is that if there are problems that we believe are disproportionate, then we will have no hesitation in invoking Article 16.
Let's head to Rushcliffe with Ruth Edwards. Ruth Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I congratulate my right honourable friend on his trade deal with the EU and welcome the prospect of a more global approach to our trading policy. Would he agree with me that a free port based at East Midlands Airport, connected to the world by trains, planes and automobiles, and focused on generating green growth is key to the success of global Britain?
Well, I'm delighted that she's campaigning for a free port. I'm a passionate supporter of free ports. They will be a process, as she knows, and successful applicants will be announced in the spring.
Let's head up to St Albans with Daisy Cooper. Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hope that the Prime Minister will join with me in congratulating the local GPs and all the admin, medical and volunteer staff who have set up the Blackford Hall Vaccination Centre in St Albans at incredible speed. They have already vaccinated thousands of residents, but their enormous local drive and success is being hampered because they are only being provided with enough vaccine supplies to vaccinate 1,100 people a day for just 2 days a week. And they are often only getting the vaccine deliveries at very short notice. So will the Prime Minister personally intervene to ensure that the Blackford Hall Vaccination Centre in St Albans and all PCN-led local vaccine services have a much greater and more consistent vaccine supply so they can get on with the job of vaccinating the country against COVID?
Well, I certainly thank the GP vaccination centre in St Albans for what they're doing and for their wonderful work, and it's thanks to, as I say, to primary care networks across the country that we've done 2.8 million vaccines, 2.4 million people, and the constraint is not the distribution network; it is the supply. But don't forget that we have a bigger supply than all other European countries. Indeed, we've virtually done as many vaccines as all other European countries put together, and we will be ramping up that supply in the days and weeks ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister join me in thanking Shropshire's defence engineers, both in the public sector and the private sector, currently working on the Warrior and Boxer military vehicle programmes, doing a great job. But as the government considers making a decision on the Challenger 2 life extension programme, will you bear in mind that excellent workforce in Shropshire that have such a history and a modern day practice of delivering UK defence?
Of course, Mr. Speaker, I'm familiar with the superb workforce in Shropshire to which he refers, and of course there is a competition currently going on, negotiations going on with the modernisation that he speaks of. As he knows, we've made the biggest investment in our defences since the Cold War, with the recent spending review, but it would not be right for me to comment on these negotiations at this stage.
Let's head to Hornsey Wood Green with Catherine West. Catherine West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, widening inequalities are tearing communities apart, and COVID's made things much, much worse. In Hornsey and Wood Green, we have a 182% increase in joblessness. Today, will the Prime Minister pledge to reverse the planned £1,000 per annum cut to universal credit to provide a certain future to all of those increasing numbers of people who use universal credit as a lifeline?
Well, Mr. Speaker, not only have we upgraded universal credit by £1,000, but as I've said, extended. Increase the local housing allowance, increase the living wage, many other benefits. We will keep all of this under constant review. But I may say that I know that she speaks for the Labour front bench. The current Labour policy, as far as I understand it, is to abolish universal credit. And I think many people in receipt of universal credit, knowing how important it is, will find that stunning in view of what she's just said.
To Brigham with Andrew Percy. Andrew Percy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Here in East Yorkshire and North Lincolnshire in the Humber, we have some of the highest flood risk in the country, and we're still waiting for the report into the flooding on the River Aire at East Carrick and Snaith, just up the road from me here, which took part 10 months ago. I welcome the doubling of flood defence funding. It is most welcome in an area particularly such as mine, but we often come up against the challenges of bureaucracy and sometimes the Treasury funding rules. So can I ask the Prime Minister to look at what more can be done to reduce the red tape in bringing schemes forward, and what we can do to, whilst I appreciate the need for national agencies, also utilise local flood councils or drainage boards by providing them with direct cash as well as to the Environment Agency to bring forward projects that will protect homes and people.
Prime Minister.
Yes. Well, my honourable friend makes a really excellent point about the need to improve flood defences, and that's why we're investing £2.6 billion in 1,000 flood defences in England in the next few years, in the next 6 years. And the Humber Estuary, the area that he represents so well, is one of 4 areas which will benefit from trials into long-term ways of making all our country more resistant to flooding.
Let's head to Kevin Brennan in Cardiff. Kevin Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's real disappointment that a reciprocal work permit-free deal for touring musicians and performers has not been agreed with the EU. No one's interested in a blame game. It's clearly fixable and in Britain's economic and cultural interest to do so quickly, but it needs leadership from the top. So will the Prime Minister meet on this virtually with a small group of MPs, including the Conservative chair of the Culture Select Committee? We're all singing from the same song sheet. Will he please say yes to the meeting?
I will, of course, ensure that there is a proper meeting with the honourable gentleman and his colleagues on this subject, which is extremely important. And I know that our friends in the EU will be wanting to go further to improve things for both, not just for musicians, but for business travellers of all kinds, because there is a mutual benefit.
Mr. Speaker, for the first time in my lifetime, we are now a fully sovereign and independent nation. So I'd like to thank the Prime Minister on behalf of the people of Redcar and Cleveland for getting Brexit done. As the member for Rushcliffe pointed out, one of the key benefits of Brexit is our ability to create 10 new free ports. And in Teesside, we have the largest brownfield development site in Europe, the deepest port on the East Coast, a fantastic Tees Valley Met in Ben Houchin, and a plan to create 15,000 jobs over the next 20 years. So does he agree with me that the best place for our first post-Brexit free port is Teesside?
There's been a bit of a theme to these interventions from my brilliant Freeport campaigners behind me. They're absolutely right. We don't hear about it from the party opposite. But Mr. Hydrogen, as I think my honourable friend is now known, makes an excellent point. As I said earlier on, the bidding process is underway, and it would be wrong of me to comment any further.
Let's head up to Kingston upon Hull with Cal Turner. Cal Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to join my right honourable and learned friend, the Leader of the Opposition, in paying tribute to those involved in the vaccine rollout. But, Mr. Speaker, the Yorkshire Post highlighted this week that many of the country's 11,000 community pharmacies stand ready, willing and able to deliver desperately needed COVID vaccines. Yet his government have seemingly shunned an army of fully trained, experienced and registered technicians. Pharmacies like Witham Pharmacy in East Hull are at the forefront of the flu vaccine every single winter and are ready to play their part in the national effort. So will the Prime Minister now take control and fully mobilise the skills and expertise of community pharmacies to get Britain vaccinated?
Well, Mr. Speaker, there are 9,000 fantastic community pharmacies across our country. They do an amazing job. What we want to ensure is that we get doses to the places where they're going to be distributed most effectively, the fastest, and I'm sure the honourable gentleman wouldn't want to see doses distributed to places, many places where they might not all be used in the course of the day. We need at this stage to avoid any wastage at all, and that's why we're concentrating, as I say, Mr. Speaker, on the 233 hospitals, 50 mass vaccination sites, 200 pharmacies already, Mr. Speaker, and we will ramp that up, and it will be particularly important as we come into the phases when we need to reach people who are harder to reach in local communities, and their local pharmacies will, as he rightly says, play a vital role.
Let's head up to Norfolk with Duncan Baker. Duncan Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the Prime Minister will join me in saying that we owe an enormous debt of gratitude to all our carers, including unpaid carers and young carers, and those throughout the social care profession for the tireless work they have done during the pandemic. And representing the oldest constituency demographic of North Norfolk, I firsthand have seen their work. Yet these professionals often feel forgotten about. This needs to change. Will the Prime Minister commit to a 10-year plan for social care to match the one for the NHS as the foundation to start reforming social care in this country?
My honourable friend is absolutely right to highlight the extraordinary work that's done by carers, social care workers up and down the country. They have got us through this pandemic. We must continue to look after them in any way that we can, and we must commit, as we have done, to reforming the sector, giving people the certainty that they need, and we will be bringing forward proposals later this year.
Let's head up to Scotland with Gavin Newlands. Gavin Newlands.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On Monday, thousands of British gas workers finished striking in protest at the threat of being fired and rehired on reduced terms and conditions. Of course, it was British Airways' shameful fire and rehire actions which prompted the Prime Minister to say he was looking at what he could do. He's also called for employers to display fairness and respect, but clearly that hasn't and isn't happening, and he must now step up. I have a bill with cross-party support which would outlaw the practice, so will he meet with me to discuss how we can provide more protection for all our workers?
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And we, as he says, we believe that using threats of firing and rehiring is unacceptable as a negotiating tactic, and there are laws in place to ensure that contractual conditions can't discriminate against people on grounds of race or sex or disability. But I'll take up his point by saying that the Department for Business is working with ACAS, businesses and employee representatives to discuss what more we can do.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Jay Fathers died in hospital having been stabbed in the early hours of New Year's Day. Last week, the killers of Dom Ansar and Ben Gillam Rice were sentenced to life imprisonment. Knife crime is destroying lives in Milton Keynes, across the Thames Valley, across the UK, even during the pandemic. Can my right honourable friend outline what support the government is giving to provide police forces with the tools they need to make our streets safer?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, first of all, we're introducing knife crime prevention orders that are placing curbs on and limits to deter young people from going equipped and getting involved in knife crime. We've made sure that we deliver on the serious violence strategy, engaging with young people, steering them away from knife crime. But what it takes is continuous and serious law enforcement, making sure that people who carry a knife do get the sentences they deserve. And that's why we're also putting more police out on the streets of our country, and have recruited almost 6,000 of the additional 20,000 that we committed to at the last election.
Let's head to Cardiff with Anna McMorran. Anna McMorran.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Workers in Cardiff North and across the country are facing continued job insecurity. And as we've heard, shameless fire and rehire tactics, forcing British gas workers to take a stand against this and strike in the most difficult of circumstances. But the director of British Gas responded by boasting that COVID has kept this strike out of the news. Will the Prime Minister condemn these remarks and protect the livelihoods of thousands of workers and their families by finally outlawing fire and rehire?
Well, Mr. Speaker, insofar as that was the gentleman's intention, he's failed in that. And I think possibly the best thing I can do is repeat what I've just said to the Honourable Gentleman who's already raised this strike. We regard fire and rehire as unacceptable, and we will continue to make that point and seek further means of redress.
Let's head to Andrea Leadsom in Northamptonshire. Andrea Leadsom.
Thank you. I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for the opportunity to chair an early years healthy development review on behalf of the government. He knows only too well how awful the lockdown has been on new parents and their families, in addition to the existing pressures that new parents find themselves in. So can he assure me that the recommendations of this important review will form a core part of his ambition to build back better and make sure that every baby gets the best start in life?
Mr. Speaker, it's many years now since I've been listening to my right honourable friend make these points with the passion and the knowledge that she does. I know that she's right. I look forward very much to her review and to her submitting her findings and to working together with her to achieve the change that we want for early years children.
Final question, Andy Slaughter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week I got an email from Eleanor Huff, the deputy head of Wendell Park Primary School in my constituency. She says lack of government guidance means her staff will soon be teaching over 100 children in school, 10 times the number in the first lockdown. Now, having a lockdown in name only may suit the Prime Minister. He can feign tackling the virus while tipping the wink to his anti-lockdown backbenchers and bending the rules himself. But as Miss Huff says, her pupils and staff, who like all Hammersmith schools are doing a fantastic job under the most difficult of circumstances, deserve better. Why are they being hung out to dry by the Prime Minister and his Education Secretary?
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank very much all the schools in Hammersmith, indeed throughout London and throughout the whole country, who are working so hard to look after vulnerable kids, to look after the children of key workers, and at the moment the percentage in school is about 14%, which is, as you will appreciate, higher than it was back in March. And I think the gist of his question was that schools should be closed. I must altogether. I don't think that is right. I think what the country wants to see is the children of key workers and vulnerable kids getting the education that they need. And I thank very, very much the teachers, all the staff involved for making that possible.
In order to allow the safe exit of honourable members participating in this item of business and the safe arrival of those participating in the next, I'm suspending the House for 3 minutes. Order.